So this is why you don't leave wood sitting around too long and process it. See the ants? Let's hope that they're not actually down inside the wood. Save the babies! Save the babies! Hi everybody, welcome to Sprague Woodturning. My name is Jim. So we haven't been outside in a long time, and I've got a bunch of roughing out to do. So you know, I've been putting it off and putting it off. Today's the day. So this week and next week is probably going to be a roughing out video as long as the weather holds. It is really sunny. Hopefully that doesn't affect filming too badly. I'll show you how I lay out these bowl blanks, how I cut them and get them ready for the lathe. So that's this video. The next video will be actually roughing it out and coring. Alright, so what I've got is a bunch of walnut and butternut to do, not a huge amount, and I've also got some cherry and maple to do as well. So that is going to be this week's video. So let's get kitted up and get to it. All right, so this is the first one. It's probably a crown piece. There's lots of branches coming out of this piece. So when I do these, I want to cut the largest branch through the center. That's going to probably give you the best figure. If I didn't mention it, this is butternut. The pith is pretty much in the center. I don't know if you're picking that up or not. So yeah, it's a gnarly piece of wood, and I'm not exactly sure what it's going to yield. All right, so a couple of things here. My lathe will only take a 20-inch bowl max, and even then that's an issue because you can't slide the banjo underneath of it. So typically I only cut blanks. The largest blanks I cut is usually 18 inches, and 18 inches is a huge bowl. So this piece I think is something like 24 inches. So we'll cut a bunch of this off here in the back and back to good wood. Same thing on the front here. Try and get rid of some of this cracking before we actually split this piece in half. So I figured this is a good time to jump in here. So these logs have been sitting for probably close to 2 years. And if you're cutting bowl blanks, you really need to cut those logs back to good wood and not have the cracks in the end, because I mean you don't want cracks in your bowls, not off the start anyway. So it's important to do that. Yeah, so much for using the tractor to put that up on the block. Well, all right, I had hoped that we'd be able to use the block a little bit more than that, but so be it. However, this is laid out perfectly. So here's this largest branch, and what I'm going to do is cut down through the center. Now you could cut either side. So here's the pith here, and if you want to line up the pith on the back, that's good. And basically when I look across here, that's going to go right down through the center of our largest branch that we have here. So, you know, hopefully that will give us some decent figure inside of this piece. Along with that, I'm going to cut probably this much off the side. That way, yeah, maybe not that much. This much. That way the bowl blank is going to be more balanced when it goes on the lathe. Same thing over here. I'll just take a little cut, make a flat spot here. And yeah, I mean, there's two really large bowl blanks, and we'll be able to core those as well. So for you new wood turners, this is really the only way to really do wood turning without, breaking the bank. Yeah, you can go down and buy uh, dried out rounds and throw them on the lathe, but it's not cheap. So anybody that's going to do this for a profession or even as a hobby, you've got to get logs and you got to process your own blanks, and that way it is a lot more cost effective to do it in that manner, and that's why all professional wood turners do it like this. Well, there's an example of why, as wood turners, we want crotch pieces. Look at that figurative grain down in this area. Awesome. Same thing on the other side. Very, very nice wood. And for butternut, this is extremely hard. Butternut's usually not this hard, so that tells me that it's got some really awesome figure in it. All right, number 2. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is cut these edges off, and then we'll split this in half, and that will, sounds pretty hollow. We'll split this in half, and then we'll get 4 large bowl blanks out of that. Yeah, I really kind of kicked myself. Butternut is a protected species here in Ontario, so I don't get a lot of it. So, it's it's bad on my part. I really should have processed this when I got it. Regardless, the bugs for the most part pretty much look like they left it alone, and it still yielded some pretty decent pieces. For the new wood turners, white birch, soft maple, poplar are great species to learn on. Stay away from softwoods like pine, spruce, and fir. They will tend to tear out when you're learning, and it can frustrate you. Yeah, the outside of this is actually quite rotten, but I think inside we're going to be all right. This might be a little hard for you to see, but there is a crack that runs like this. So kind of in this direction right through the pith. So that's where our cut will be. And what I'm going to do here is I think I'm just going to cut it right down straight through the pith. I'm not going to do the 2 cuts either side of it. And we'll trim off again the ends here. Back to good wood anyway. So we don't want to leave the pith in any of our bowls because the pith is very unstable, and that's the very center of the tree. A lot of times I'll just cut straight down through it and I won't cut out, let's say a 2-inch piece, but it's very important to remove that from your work or else you're going to have issues. Well, there you go. That's pretty much a perfect cut right down through the pith. Couldn't get any better than that. All right, so as you can see, we really don't have much option. We've got to split this piece this way. If you tried splitting it this way, both of these bowls are going to have huge cracks in them. So, I'm going to take probably about 3 inches out of the center of this, and then hopefully we'll be in good solid wood. I'm going to cut this back on this side because of this, and try and even it up on this side too. A lot of times it's not going to matter what you want. The bowl blank itself is going to tell you what it wants. So this log has that big crack and you can see it. So you're pretty much forced to cut it in this direction. If you cut it in any other direction, then you're going to have issues with that crack running through the very top part or the rim of the bowl. So, the wood a lot of times will tell you what it wants. So there you go. This isn't a total waste. You could cut this back to here. This is large enough to make probably 2 pepper mills. You might be able to squeak 2 on the other side as well. If this was better, you could actually make cutting boards out of this, split this down the center to the pith, and then you got 2 cutting boards as well. So, worst case scenario is firewood. So here I'm marking on the very center part of this blank, the width and the height of it. and I'm going to drill a hole, and that is going to drop onto a pin that's on my circle cutting jig. Now, full disclosure, I haven't really used the circle cutting jig to rough out. I've used it a lot on the channel for finish turning, but it was fighting me. And I've got a wood turner bandsaw blade on there, and I'll put a link in the description for that. I highly recommend them, especially when you're working with green wood. And anyway, the blade was dull, and as soon as I changed the blade, I stopped having issues. And there is a valuable stack of butternut. So this is walnut, and ideally when I get logs, I like to get them in long lengths, 8 foot to 16 foot long. That's what I prefer to get my logs in. Now at the time I didn't have a tractor, and I wanted to kind of get them up on the pallets, so I cut them into 4 foot lengths and stacked them on the pallet. So that's kind of why they're in short lengths. I mean, so this is a prime example. The wood's going to tell you what it wants to, how it wants to be cut. You can't cut a blank like this, which would probably give you, you know, 2 equal size bowls, because this is split running through it. So you're forced to actually go in this direction when you're cutting these planks. So it's got a really bad pith, so we're going to have to cut probably 4 inches out of the center of this tree. So, you know, it's going to be something like this and something like this. Smaller bowls on this side for sure. Nice deep bowls on this side though. Anyway, this is about the right length to just split in half, and that's exactly what I'm going to do with this piece. The other ones are pretty much the same way. You'll see this a lot with felled trees. So when this tree was cut, this is probably the piece that was attached to the stump when it. So anyway, it's busted off, so it's cracked all the way through. We're going to have to probably go in this direction with this piece. This looks to be fairly solid, though the pith does come over to here, or crack I should say. Really, until we get past this crack, and I don't know, hopefully the next blank that we cut will be all right, and we'll be able to get 2 equal out of each side. But you know, we'll be able to get something out of here, but it's not going to be super huge. You know, this one's the same way. We've got a crack up to here, to here. So, you know, once I get this cut in half, then we'll see, and I mean half as in lengthwise. Hopefully it's better deeper in the log, but as it stands right now, geez, I don't know. Probably the best way to do this would be split it like this. You might have a crack on one side, but you know, we certainly know how to fill cracks on this channel, don't we? All right, so I'm going to cut these in half lengthwise, and then we'll split them and we'll have a look at the inside of them. So this is another reason to process logs when you get them. That log probably didn't have that crack in it when I first got it, but you know, I cut it short and it sat there for, you know, probably a couple of years, and those cracks had migrated. So if you get a valuable species like walnut, you really should hop on it and get it done. So yeah, if you're curious, ants like walnut too. I find ants in my logs actually quite often, and usually if you pull the bark off, they'll find somewhere else to go. I also will use ant baits, and I'll leave them around my log piles, and that, you know, if you keep putting them out, it will eventually kill the ants and get them away from your logs, because they don't typically chew things up too much. They're just more a nuisance than anything. All right, so there's a couple of really nice black walnut blanks. You'll be able to get at least 1 core out of this, 3 out of this, and this piece isn't a loss either, because you can cut pepper mills out of it. So I know this looks like a waste, but this pith had to go because it's just too unstable. But as you can see, you know, there's a couple of peppermill blanks. I know that I haven't talked about it, but I typically will go on the other side of the log and mark where the pith is, or where I want my cuts to be. You could use a marker, but I find it's just easier to use a saw, because once you put a little mark in there, it's very visible, where a marker may not be so much. I think this is the one that where it was attached to the stump and it had a big crack in it, so that's why the weird cut. I'll tell you something, that has definitely made my life a lot easier. All right, so I've changed out the blade on the bandsaw here. I was getting some wander on the blade yesterday, so I'm hoping that by putting a new blade on there, it's going to stop doing that. Anyway, let's get these rounded up, and then we'll do some cherry and some maple. Still got that to do yet. So this here is the most effective way that I've found to work with this circle cutting jig. Put that metal bar with the pin inside the wood, drop it down on the channel, and once it's in, you're golden. Trying to find that pin by just dropping the log onto it is, well, it's pretty painful. So this by far is the best method that I've found doing, during this roughing out session. The other thing too that you really want to consider doing is stripping off the bark. There's a couple reasons for that. The bark will hold dirt and critters, neither of which you want in your workshop. So what will that do? That will, if there's a lot of dirt there, that shows you how good that circle cutting jig is. See how thin that is? It's like probably 1/8 of an inch. So when you're processing wood, the cleaner the wood is, the better, and you'll sharpen less when you've got it mounted on the lathe. And along with that, you're not going to go through as many bandsaw blades as well. So a lot of times I will strip the bark off. I didn't in this case, and it probably all would have come off relatively easy since the logs have been sitting around for so long. But it wasn't really so much a factor, and I only used one blade here to process in the neighborhood of probably 50 bowl blanks. So it's an expense, and again, these are a specialty blade that has a really wide kerf on it. So if you try to use a blade that doesn't have a wide kerf, then what happens is it tends to bind inside the wood, especially green wood. So that's why these blades are called wood turner blades and furniture blades. And that's why you cut all that out of the center of the log. If you left that in a bowl, it would really, really crack badly. And while I'm good at fixing cracks, I prefer to not start with cracks, if you know what I mean. If cracks happen during the drying process, then so be it. And there you go. There's a perfect pepper mill blank, or whatever you want to use it for. This is a alternative look at the circle cutting jig. I thought I'd give you a couple of views. I'm happy that I made this. And there is a video actually where I basically in detail show how this is made. At that time, the white plastic material wasn't on it. I think I had tuck tape on it. But anyway, you can see like that's a really big, heavy, thick blank, and that blade's just whipping through it. All right, well, if you're curious, there is 8 blanks of walnut and 8 of butternut. The butternut should yield between 3 and 4 pieces each, hopefully. The walnut, you're going to get maybe a core out of this. It's not very deep, same maybe with that. The bigger ones, you might get 3 bowls total. So anyway, that's it for the walnut and the butternut. Still got cherry and maple to go. But that's tomorrow, because I'm beat. I should also mention before I quit for the day, I always cover up the blanks with this heavy plastic. This is 6 mil poly. It's not cinched tight around it. It can breathe a little bit. I've actually left bowl blanks of this for a couple of weeks. It will get a little fuzzy and moldy on the blanks, but you know, I'd sooner have that than cracking. All right, so we'll see you guys tomorrow. So with that said, the first cut you take on that bowl blank on the lathe, it will get rid of all that mildew or mold or whatever you want to call it. So it's not really a concern. The concern is the cracking, so put some plastic on it. Now this is a little disappointing. I was really hoping that this cherry crotch was going to yield some really nice bowl blanks, but unfortunately it didn't. Again, this was brought to me by a client, and I know that he's probably going to be looking for really big bowls, and well, unfortunately it's just not going to happen. So all right, I just trimmed this piece. As you can see though, the split is going this way. That's no good. If you're going to cut crotch pieces, you're going to cut them like this. Same thing on this side. It's too bad, like I said, ordinarily you would cut that crotch piece down through the crotch like this, but the wood is not stable and it goes completely through the piece. You know, if this little crack here was just, you know, like this big, then I would say sure, no problem. But you know what, do yourself a favor, don't try and turn this, because it's kind of sketchy and it can fly apart and really hurt you. So now what we're gonna have to do is just cut pieces like this, because that's really all you can do with this. I learned a long time ago that it's, you know, I don't turn unsafe pieces on the lathe anymore. I'm a pretty good judge of what's safe and what isn't safe. And actually I've got a piece bolted to the wall in front of my lathe to remind me that accidents certainly can happen. All right, so for this piece we might be able to get a small platter, maybe a small bowl. But you know, it's just, there's your figurative crotch grain, and it's just all unstable. So we should be able to do something with it though. Here's the other side. It's got a split that goes all the way through to here. So, you know, we'll have to cut this back to get anything out of this at all. But really not much figure to speak of. A couple of bowl blanks for sure. Not a real big one though. This has got a big old knot on it. What I'll probably do is trim this off on this side to make it flat, but there's a branch coming through there. I mean, all of these pieces will probably require resin to be fixed. I swear every time I turn this camera on, it turns into the Indy 500 here. All right, so this is a piece of maple. Ordinarily, I wouldn't work with this. It's for a friend, so that's why I'm doing it. And what I'm going to do here is probably cut this back here. It's very, very, the bottom part of this is trash. So, you know, really, there's not a whole lot that you can do with this. To try and fix it to the lathe is going to be interesting if you try to work with any of this. So what I'm going to do is trim this off here, trim it over there, and then I'm going to try and go for a cut like this, and then hopefully we've got a big bowl blank here. This, I believe, is a knot grover is what this is, but we'll find out as soon as we cut it open. As you can see, I've got this piece of maple onto this stump that I've cut a groove into. You can also see a little eyelet down there, and what I would do is I could run a strap over the top of this and hold that piece in place. I've actually cleaned off the top. The top of it was kind of chewed up a bit, so that's why that first log fell off of it right at the very beginning. All right, so this is the inside of that piece of wood. And as you can see, I mean, it's got some figurative grain inside of it. Knots will, or branches will typically always have figurative grain on the inside of them. Here's a little cap that I cut off. And if you were so inclined to, you could make something with this as well. Let me flip it over on the other side. So yeah, just as I expected, it is a knot grow over. But again, you know, there's a lot of figurative grain around these knots. The biggest issue that you're going to have with dealing with these pieces, and it's not really so much an issue if this is a solid knot, but like this, is how do you fix this to the lathe? So, you know, we'll have to be pretty careful when we fix this to the lathe so that it doesn't fly off. I mean, probably putting a live center there would probably be fine. But anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. All right, so it's too hot out here. What I'm going to do is in another hour and a half or so, we'll have a lot more shade here. So I'm just going to take those in, round them, and then we'll come back out and tackle some of this. There's some other cherry and some large maple here too. So it's just too hot. If you're curious, this video was shot over 4 days. That's why you see me with different shirts on here and there. I think we had a rain day in there as well, but that also gave me a chance to start working on the 60,000 subscriber giveaway bowl. So that was good. So anyway, yeah, we're just rounding this like we did with the others. And, you know, it's not a very pretty piece of wood, but, you know, we now know that combine this with resin, this cherry and that other maple piece, that, you know, you can make some really spectacular pieces. Really, the resin has really opened my eyes as to more the artistic side of the house. And I know that there's a lot of negativity towards it, but you know, it's really opened my creativity. All right, so I thought I would show this before any of these blanks crack any further. As you can see, I've written the date on the end of it. That way I know kind of when they were processed. And you know, something like this, if it's 4 inches, it'll take 4 years for this to dry. So typically stuff like this I'll put in the drying shed for say a year if I don't need it, and then I'll run it through my kilns until it's dry to use. So anchor seal is what I use. I have the glycol formula because we live in Canada and it freezes. I will try and put a link at the end of this video to anchor seal so you can get some. This is just an old paint tray. And just like you would with a latex brush, or sorry, latex roller, I just put this in a bag and it stays pliable and ready to use. So all we're going to do is coat the end grain on all of these blanks, and then that way they're not going to crack any further, and then they can be stacked in the drying shed. Now, if you're not familiar with this product, it gets painted on the end grain. It's called anchor seal, and it slows down the moisture release from the wood. So why does wood crack? Wood cracks because the moisture leaves the wood too soon or too fast, and that's what causes cracks. So this here stays a little pliable, and it will move, especially when a bowl dries, it will kind of pull in on itself, and it will actually, for the most part, stay attached to the end grain as it's drying. But in this case, we want to just seal up all the ends on all of these blanks, and then that way you're not losing any value. And you know, there's some value here. Don't think that there isn't. If you ever gone out and bought any walnut, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So you know, all of these pieces here are from the blanks that we processed yesterday, and the pith would have been either side. Well, I guess the pith would be on this side of it. So you cut the pith out, and you've got, you know, a good solid piece of wood to work with. And this is just a liquid wax, really, is all this is. Another thing you can do is take some thin Starbond, such as this, You've seen me use this a ton on the channel. And if you do see some cracks that are going down, hit it with the CA glue and then put the anchor seal over top of it, and it should not split open any further. And of course, if you wish, you can use a brush. I find that the roller is typically a lot faster, so that's why I use a roller. And they say if you put 2 coats on it, it certainly will work better. I usually just do the 1 coat and call it done. There, in the morning, this will dry clear. You'll notice that there is a wax coating on it, but that's it. Stack them in your wherever you want to dry it. Make sure you put kind of a sticker between it so that they don't stick together, so that there's airflow around them. And you know, like in this blank, like here, you know, you could probably have that dry in a year. For me, I'd probably put that out there for 6 months and then put it in my fridge kiln. And 2 months later, it'd be good to go. And by the way, I've literally been using the same roller here for years. Then I just pour the rest back into the bucket, and it's not gonna bother it at all. All right, so I heat with wood heat. So I just make these corrals out of pallets, and then all of my offcuts go into there, and then I burn them either in my workshop or inside the house every winter. I just noticed that I had a pretty wicked sunburn there. Something you don't think of until after. All right, well, that's it for today. My body's telling me that to shut it down, so got to listen to your body. Hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to get this gigantic maple and see what can be made with that. And I also have some cherry. So, and the flies are bad. But you can't win. Anyways, we'll see you tomorrow. All right, well, welcome to day 4. We've got a lot of really large maple in here to try and get through here today. That piece there is really nice. This is a really large crotch piece, but I don't know. I think that it's unstable all the way through it. Regardless, I mean, even if you cut it down this way, there's still some pretty large bowl blanks on this side. There's a decent sized piece of cherry. I'd like to see it bigger, but that's all we got. That should yield a really interesting crotch piece and then some large bowls. So there's lots of value here. So we're going to try and get through this. It's supposed to be another really hot day today, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes here. All right, let's first of all get all this stuff out of here with the tractor so we can work on it. I might cut that cherry log up where it sits. Be easier. One thing about these pallets, you just got to make sure that you don't hit the nails, because that will definitely ruin your chain. And so just be careful if you're cutting logs while they're on pallets. As we cut up the cherry log here, I should also explain. So when I mark my logs for bowl blanks, I measure the log inside the bark, and say if that's 10 inches, then I'll measure 10 inches up the length of the log and cut it off. And then of course, once you split that in half, you in theory should have a 10-inch bowl. When that dries, it's probably more in the 9-inch area. So a lot of times though, when you get to the end, I just split the difference, and then that way you get 4 blanks instead of 2. All right, so when it comes to pieces like this, you can see where there was a big branch coming out through here. So cutting this down through here is going to give you probably more figure than if you had cut it the other way. The other way also, so if this was turned on its side, then this bowl here would have a big knot in the base of it. So you really don't want that. Now we got some rot going on in here. We'll have to see what that yields when we open it up. But you know, when I'm cutting these logs, I typically will cut out these large branch areas and use them for figurative wood, because inside here, I guarantee you there's going to be some nice figure. Let's find out. So these logs with the large branches on them, you can pretty much treat them as crotch wood pieces because, well, essentially that's what it is. It's just not an even crotch like you typically would. And there you go. I mean, look, there's some really nice figure in there. And, that figure may be the difference between selling your products and not. So it's important that you cut your blanks properly. And anyway, we're just going to kind of work through this. I don't know if I did the whole log here or not. And like I said, a lot of times, if the pith is relatively stable in these pieces, then I'll just cut straight down through the center of it. And then when it's mounted on the lathe, I'll clean away, a half inch to 3/4 of an inch in the pith area. And you can see that piece has a big knot. And if you were to cut that the other way, then that knot again would be in the base of your bowl, which you really don't. And I missed the pith area on that one, so that's why I cut it again if you're curious. This one here is a little long for its diameter, but it was kind of one of these pieces where if you split it in half, then you're probably only going to end up with like maybe an 8-inch blank. So, and I typically, to be honest with you, do not like making anything that's less than 10 inches in diameter. And the reason for that is because, you know, it takes me the same amount of time to make, say, a 6-inch bowl as it does to make a 10-inch bowl. But of course, there's greater value in a 10-inch bowl. And that's just, that's a kind of a business thing. And there's a couple of beautiful crotches on that cherry, no complaints there. So, I think most wood turners do this by themselves. So you have to be, if you want to stay in business and kind of make a living at this, you have to pick and choose what you do and what sells. And that's kind of why I stick with bigger bowls. Did I mention that I really like having a tractor to process blanks now? Man, you have no idea how much easier it is on your body when you've got equipment like this to do it. All right, so here's our first chunk of maple. I've stripped the bark off it. There was a fair bit of dirt in it, so I decided to strip it off. It come off quite easily. We're just going to clean that end up a little bit. Don't need a whole lot there. On this side, though, probably cut it back to about here, somewhere around there. And then we'll probably just cut it in half. And then that's a fairly decent sized log. So, we'll get 4 blanks out of it. And then each blank should yield at least 2 or 3 pieces each. Same as all the other logs before, the maple was being treated the same. Everything was going perfectly fine. And then there's an issue. And there it is right there. See that black in there? That means there's metal in there. And I thought it was actually in this piece over here. Did quite a number on my chain, so I'm gonna have to sharpen that. All right, so I got this metal detector from Amazon a couple of years ago, and I should have been checking these logs because of the urban timber. Jeez, it's picking up a signal everywhere. I actually do see a nail right there. think the metal is just on this side, so I'll cut this off and we'll, hopefully there's no metal in here because it's going to do a number on our bandsaw blade if there is. Yeah, there's actually metal in this off-cut piece that was on the end too. Well, should have known better. As a wood turner, I get contacted all the time by somebody, you know, they say, hey, I just took a tree down in my yard and you're interested in it. And, you know, the funny thing is, literally today, I got contacted by somebody wondering if I wanted a tree in the yard. And, you know, most times I will take that tree. But, you know, get yourself a metal detector. It'll save you a lot of heartache. I should have been using it and I knew better because I actually got this tree from a friend's place. And I did see some metal in it initially, but totally forgot about it. So anyway, I'm not saying to pass on that timber, but there's a reason why sawmills will typically never put yard trees through the mill, and that's because of the metal. As you can see, I've got all the bark stripped off this, or the vast majority of it. It's up on a couple of blocks here to try and keep the chain out of the dirt. What I'm going to do is cut this piece off here, get rid of these nubs of this crotch piece, measure down 18 inches, make another cut, 18 inches, make another cut, and then this way we should have some really good figure down in here. So I'll measure 18 inches from this cut, and there you go. You've got, you know, some really nice bowl blanks. Let's do it. And just going back to the metal thing, you know, I've sharpened a chainsaw now for a long time, and you know, I'm okay at it. I wouldn't say I'm great at it, but I do find that once you hit metal like that, it is so hard to sharpen that chain and get it right back to the way that it was before. Like I said, I don't typically pass on yard trees unless, you know, I show up and I can see metal all through it, and I'm like, nah, no thanks. It's just not worth the heartache that it's going to cause. All right, well, not a ton of luck with crotch pieces on this video, that's for sure. As you can see, this split here again is trouble. On the other side, though, it's solid. So, you know, it's probably safe to turn. If you did rotate that up, then you're going to have to deal with these pits that you see on the crotch piece as well. So, you know, I think I'll just cut it down through here. But as you can see, you're going to have quite a deep bowl blank on one side and not so much on the other side. Well, I shouldn't say, you know, that's still probably a good 5-inch deep blank. So that's not bad. So it's funny, I've been planning this video for a while now, and I was looking in my inventory and saying, oh, you know, I've got all these crotch pieces and they should make really spectacular blanks, and and just about everyone I cut open had flaws in it where, you know, it was unusable in the sense of how you would traditionally use a crotch piece on the lathe. And this brings up another problem. So if you're buying wood, and I do buy wood occasionally, not a lot of times I don't have to, but if I'm looking for walnut or cherry, I typically have to buy it. And you know, so you'll look at a log and you say, oh yeah, that's great. And from the outside, everything looks fine. And then you get it home and cut it open, and you know it's full of rot or the bugs have been in it. You know, it's really it's quite an art to stand back and look and buy logs and not get taken on them. And I mean, the seller too, he could look at it, or he or she could look at it and say, yeah, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with these logs. And you know, I've been down this road where I bought logs and everything looked great, and then first time I put the chainsaw into it, I'm like, well, that's not good. So the way it goes, you win most, but you lose some of them, that's for sure. So, you know, it's buyer beware, and I think most times people are not, they don't know that there's issues or flaws in the log. So, you know, it's just what it is. So you're gonna deal with it, I guarantee it. There's a couple of crotches, got some really nice figure in them. All right, let's get these loaded up, and then we'll tackle We'll tackle the big boy. If you've never seen one of these before, this is what's called a PV. That's what I'm using to rotate this log into position. And you know, this is why you should always keep an eye on what you're working on, because it can certainly roll over on top of you. Anyway, I just got a little block and held it in place. Oh, all right, it's orientated correctly. I'm going to cut down through the hearts here. I'm going to trim those back a little bit because there's no point in cutting these. I mean, the crotch probably doesn't even start till about there, so really trim that stuff off. A little worried about that split that goes all the way through here. I don't know. But that'll give me an opportunity to use the big saw, the backbreaker. Oh, that is a massive maple crotch. Just like we did with the previous crotches, I'm just going to trim it back till I get to decent wood. That's really going to depend on the size of your saw. This is a 365 Husqvarna, and with a 20-inch bar. That's what I like to work with, but we got the big one coming up. So this is a 3120 XP Husqvarna, again with a 42-inch bar on it. And you know, if you need power, you've got it with this saw. The chain wasn't as sharp as I'd like it to be, and it was kind of fighting me. It just was going to take so long to sharpen the chain because it's so big. So that's kind of why I just kind of forced my way through it, but really you shouldn't. But anyway, it is a big, powerful saw, but it is not light. And the crotch in this piece was so unstable that I actually took 2 cuts to get rid of the whole entire crotch center. And you know, you can see me switching hands on this. It's near the end of the day, and to be quite honest with you, I'm quite tired, and you know, I probably should have left it for another day, but I was running out of time, so I had to punch my way through it. But it is a big, powerful, heavy saw. And I actually bought it for slabbing. That was the main reason why I bought this saw. I wanted to cut up some slabs. And I should also mention that I took my chainsaw pants off to get on the tractor. I find trying to get onto the tractor is difficult with the chainsaw chaps, if you will. So I took them off and totally forgot to put them back on. And so anyway, always wear your chainsaw pants if you got them. Well, and if you don't have them, get them and wear them. So anyway, that saw, after I shut it off, I had a hard time getting it going. And so I just finished off the cut with my normal 365 and it worked fine. So this is why you should process the wood every year, because if you don't, you get these worms in here and they will destroy your wood. That's why I also like to clean the bark off if I can before I bring them inside. And that way you just don't have creepy crawlers all going through your shop. Unless you're into it. So this piece was so unstable that, you know, it was to the point where I wasn't going to be able to use it like a normal crotch section that I would use. I mean, it would have made a huge, beautiful bowl, but it just wasn't in the cards. And, you know, speaking of safety, I'm wearing steel toe boots. Always wear steel toe boots when you're working around logs like this. First time one rolls over on your foot when you're not wearing them, you'll probably know why. I do have glasses on. I don't see the need to wear a helmet. There's no need for that, not in the yard. Typically, most injuries with chainsaws happen when you're felling the tree and when you're limbing the tree. But I highly recommend wearing chainsaw pants. So it held some promise for this piece, but it's not going to work either. That crack, you know, it's a little hard to see, but it probably goes all the way down to there. And on the other side, it pretty much goes all the way through. So we'll have to split that in half. We'll get 2 bowl blanks that are there. Same thing with this one. It's even worse. And that one too. So 2, 4, 6, 8 bowl blanks out of 1 crotch piece, but I was really hoping for some figurative wooding. We'll see that in there in some of these pieces, but man, is that chainsaw ever heavy. I ain't gonna lie. My hat's off to whoever can sling that around in the woods all day. My hat is off to you. So this is that same maple, and just got a couple of little quick shots here of it being processed into rounds. I decided to actually take the majority of these pieces because they're really kind of oddly shaped. If they were, like that's a good solid bowl blank shape there, so that's why I roughed that out into a bowl. But for the other ones that were a little weirder than this, and you'll see them here in a minute, I turned them into vase blanks. And that's what I'm doing here. So I removed the circle cutting jig from the bandsaw because I needed the height underneath the guides on the bandsaw. So I can cut 12 inches under the bearings on my bandsaw. So it's a good bandsaw. I'm actually very pleased with it. It's 2 horsepower, 18-inch General International. So I needed the height, so the circle cutting jig, you lose about, I think it's about 1.25 inches in height if it was sitting on the deck. So that's why I decided to get rid of it and then cut a bunch of vase blanks, and we'll see those here shortly. And that's just a piece of cherry, just peeling off little slivers of it, just to make it perfectly round. All right, there you go. 50 bowl blanks or vase blanks ready to go on the lathe. Did a quick count. It may not be exactly right, but I think there's 10 walnut blanks in there that should yield 2 to 3 pieces each. 24 maple pieces. Most of them will get at least 1 out of them, maybe 2. That stack over there, that's all maple. And cherry, there's about 18, and I think we might be able to get 2 out of each cherry blank, but we'll have to see. So, that's it. Ton of work. It is, it's back-breaking labor. There ain't no doubt about it. But if you don't have this, you don't have the pretty stuff in the end. All right, so before we end the video, I just wanted to point some stuff out. This is really the first time that I've used this jig, and I was having issues with the wood hitting this plastic material in the back. So anyway, it doesn't look the best, but I took my staple gun, my air nailer, and nailed it all down in here. And now it's not an issue when you're trying to run things through straight. It wasn't really so much an issue rounding, but trying to run things through straight was an issue. So that's an upgrade from that. This here, taking this off and putting it onto the bowl blank before dropping it on there is certainly the way to go. And there's a little washer that prevents this from coming out of the track. So once you drop it on here and that goes in, it can't lift out. So slide this up to where you want it, C-clamp it on the back, and there you go. That's all it takes. Trying to drop the pieces onto this with it mounted in the track was very irritating. So that's the way to do that. Over here, in total, I think we've got 13 walnut blanks, 2 large maple, what will be cutting boards of some sort. I left the natural edge on this one. I cut it off. Well, I guess it's still on that one too. 4 more blanks here, and 2 butternut. Oh, I tell you, I'm so glad that I bought that tractor. Well, all right, hopefully the video wasn't too long for you, and I realize that this video is geared more towards wood turners and beginner wood turners. But I think it's important for me to cover this on my channel. I know that a lot of beginner wood turners are following me, and the only reason they're following me is because they like the way that I teach, and hopefully they can take something away from that, and hopefully everybody can take some stuff away from this video. It is back-breaking, dirty, dusty, sweaty work, but you know, like I said earlier, without this, you don't have the pretty stuff in the end. We are over 60,000 subscribers. Wow, thank you so much. So next week we will do the 60,000 subscriber giveaway bowl before we get too many subs ahead here, and that way anyway I can keep on top of it. And the week after that, hopefully we're going to take these bowl blanks and process them into roughed out wooden bowl blanks for the drying shed. So that'll be in 2 weeks time if everything goes right. All right, well that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Take care, stay safe, don't forget that bell, and please share my videos with your friends. See you next week.